he came back up to Mars. 2 years later, because he wanted to keep building something.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Spoiler alert, since Danielle can't be everywhere at once and has a calming influence on a variety of issues, a lot of individuals will need to stand up to help make Mars a little more hospitable. Things on the Red Planet have changed significantly since Dani and Ed's last encounter, even though they exchanged a hi bob during their reunion on Mars in fall, Mankind Season 4 Episode 2. We don't like that the haves and the have-nots on Mars still feel like an upstairs-downstairs dynamic. Much of it is obvious to Dani even on her first flight, but Ed still seems to be a fervent believer in the US versus them mentality that results from belonging to a group as important as astronauts. The thrill of the space race is still fresh in your memory from the first season of For All Mankind. Back then, not everyone was included either. Women had to struggle to be accepted as worthy candidates for flight school, and now Helios's civilian staff must go through a similar ordeal. Despite the amazing sales pitch Miles heard on For All Mankind Season 4 Episode 1, things are not always as they seem on Mars. He was presented with a package that included so many fine print details that he didn't even think to ask the necessary inquiries. It's a lot to process after watching the masterfully constructed section on how Dani and Miles settled into Happy Valley. It showed what the haves had and what the have-nots lacked. After her journey, Dani was able to easily converse with her friends and family back home, cuddle up in her cozy quarters, well, she is a commander, so that's to be expected, and save a fettuccine with greens grown on Mars. In contrast, civilian communications are unavailable. Family connections are impossible for them. They are suffering in filthy, claustrophobic conditions with no privacy. Their meal is served in little compartments that resemble apartment mailboxes, and it tastes like freeze-dried rations. The gap between the affluent and the impoverished is enormous, and there is simmering animosity among the populace that will eventually explode. Fortunately, Dani has been away from all of this for long enough to be aware of what's going on and capable of taking action. Ed complains that the public is only interested in making money in the meantime. Dani is aware that the analogy is unfair. Our lives are filled with little things, but staying in touch with loved ones who live light years away isn't one of them. Are we really to assume that no one has thought of the possibility that growing utilities on Mars would likewise be necessary to support a rising population? Has the duration of civilian life on Mars been disclosed? It's been long enough for there to be a noticeable split between the two sides, which doesn't usually occur instantly. Was it actually the case that the first 20 individuals consumed food packages while the others consumed freshly prepared meals? How much time did that take? And why was the beginning of that divide hidden from view? It depresses us to think that we would fail miserably from the start if we were given another chance to get things right. Yet Happy Valley is a prime example of that. When Miles first got off the transport, he felt like a child in a candy store, but before he could even begin to realize what was going on, he was confined and made aware of reality. From taking pictures on the shuttle to being informed, whoa, that's not a hallway you're meant to visit. It couldn't have taken place in more than 30 minutes. If you don't get what you need, you'll find a way to get it. And there's a booming black market on Mars already. Can you imagine Happy Valley being born without that separation? Although money can be generated, NASA and Helios aren't doing it. It's a missed chance, which is odd, given that cost-cutting efforts are partially to blame for the division. On Mars, citizens are required to pay for everything they own and do. There are no perks to working there. It's not the lucrative employment they're promised on Earth. Rather, it resembles incarceration. People like Miles can't even be heroes to their children back home without lying about it because the lucrative and fascinating jobs that would have allowed citizens to set foot on Mars land are no longer available. A chip the size of the asteroid that killed Sam's companion is resting on her shoulder. Ed is wearing a badge that indicates Grigory's death, but where are the feelings of regret and respect for the citizen who died alongside him? Miles fell into the chasm that is Sam's home with little encouragement. That worked. What met his eyes on Mars? The harsh realities of their new life, one that wasn't on par with others living on the higher floors, were all that was present instead of a welcome wagon. Things converged when we had the experience of arriving on Mars as both Miles and Dani, and they left in the elevator. Dani offered her assistance where she could, and Ed even hosted an all-inclusive thank you party. But the harm was done by then. Those who showed up soon realized how valuable they were. They would have to reimburse $150 for their waste training, their shuttle voyage to Mars, and various other expenses related to the tainted offering if they were to go back home. As stated by me, although that's a lot, It prepares us for a stormy season on the Red Planet. After being a have, Margot is now a have-not, but if I were to ask her where her spirit was hidden and how she managed to avoid difficulty, I think she probably wishes she hadn't discovered it before she even arrived at her favorite only bakery, a political coup that everyone but her knew about occurred, upending her routine life. I was reminded of all the times June in The Handmaid's Tale was pushed into the rear of a dark truck. Will Margot find someone to risk everything for her, like June has done so many times before? I really hope so. Not all of the news on Have a Nice Soul was negative. It's absurd that Kelly and Alida had never crossed paths until now, but their friendship makes perfect sense. Alida was in a terrible position. After emerging from that hole in the ground, we saw her transform into the young woman who grew under Margot's guidance. For a while now, Alida and Kelly had both let other people decide what would happen to them. It's the way things often operate in strict hierarchies. They can overcome those constraints if they take charge of their destiny and make their ambitions come true on their own terms, despite the current mistreatment of humans in space. Alida and Kelly are wise to pursue a career in the private sector, as it is the way of the future. In terms of dismantling the Foundation and making up for the mistakes committed in the space expansion, For All Mankind Season 4 is about par. Will the series correct my idle mindset and prove me wrong by reaching a magnificent peak after a few false starts? You must have trust